ask if there are any apologies.
Through the Chair, we have apologies from Mayor Brown, Councillor Cashmore, Councillor Crowe, Member MacDonald, Councillor Gratz and Councillor Sir John Walker for absence, and Councillor Penrose for departure.
I'm early departure.
And
Early.
Councillor Crumbs.
Penny holds for late.
Well, I move that the apologies be received. I'll second that. Put that motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declare that carried. Thank you. I just want to mention that we hope to get this meeting over because there is a appointment. Some council have got an appointment this afternoon in relation to an overseas delegation that's in Auckland. So we'll. I think there's no problem about that happening. Any declarations of interest? Well, you got any matters they want to declare an interest in? No. We now go to confirmation of minutes, and I will move. Councillor and I will move that we confirm the ordinary minutes of the meeting of this committee held on Thursday the 4th of August last as a true and correct record. I'll second that. I'll put that motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declare that carried. Thank you. Members, Councillor Stewart's just reminded me that we should all stand for a minute's silence for the death of Sarah. Thank you, members of the public. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just on acknowledgements, this is your final meeting as chair of this committee, I understand?
Well, yes, possibly, unless there's another meeting. There's a provision for a meeting in October.
I would just, as your North Shore colleague, I'd just like to lead an acknowledgement on behalf of all the councillors of Councillor Wood in chairing this committee. I've known, if I can say, George, since 99. You came in as mayor of 99, wasn't it, George?
Yep, yeah.
Of North Shore City, and known him for a pretty long innings, and I think we've worked extremely constructively all the way. But particularly, I'm not suggesting this is a sign-off from local government, Mr. Chair, because you are standing for the Devonport Takapuna Local Board, but I think it's an opportunity for all of us to acknowledge what it takes to actually chair a committee here at council and to be committed for a very lengthy period leading the North Shore community and the wider communities of Auckland. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for your work and your ultimate meeting, which I think it is, here at Auckland Council.
Well, thank you. And I'd also like to mention that this is Councillor and I's last meeting possibly of this committee, which he is the Deputy Chairman of. And Arthur and I have worked in a constructive way, attending pre-gender meetings and just having early discussions before the meeting with the officers, and I think that's been very helpful. So I certainly thank Arthur for his contribution as well, and contribution across council. Arthur, thank you. Thank you. So thank you for that, Councillor Darby. Much appreciated. We now move to petitions. There's no petitions, so we move to item 5, which is public input, and we do have a number of people in public input. I have asked that the secretary that we keep these to strictly the 5 minutes, and we'll have 3 questions for each, a maximum of 3 questions for each submitter. So the first is Mr. Stephen Browning, who is a Green Party MP, spokesperson for the organics, pesticides, GE, food safety and biosecurity matters. Yes, if you sit there, Mr. Greening, that'd be much appreciated. And yes, you have 5 minutes, and you have a presentation documents that you also wish to have distributed.
Yes.
Thank you.
Am I better to sit? Or
Yes, sit. Yeah, we're fine. Yes.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Kia ora tātou, and thanks for giving me this 5 minutes. I'm actually very concerned that this council is actually reviewing what appears to be a very good weeds policy and a very recent weeds policy.
Exactly.
It seems to be effective, or it should be effective, and it probably should really be being implemented rather than being reviewed. And I actually have to question what the nature of the review, or what has really prompted the review, when the evidence around the world is that this glyphosate-based herbicide that the council's decided to increase in this area is actually being pulled all around the world. And it's very, very concerning. You have to wonder what the politics is that has driven you to do this, or what is happening in the staff of this council and maybe Auckland Transport that's already got a bad reputation to have done this. It's very, very concerning. Christchurch in this time is phasing it out over the next 2 years, and the European Commission has just recommended to all its member states that this herbicide come out of parks and playgrounds and public places, and for some other uses as well. They only gave it an 18-month extension while they did further research rather than the 15 years that they were going for their normal consent. There's some very big concern internationally. Yesterday I was out at Robbie's statue, and I thought Robbie would never have gone down this path. Robbie would be most concerned at the direction this council has gone in terms of the sprays. The pack I've given you, apart from some nice stickers to give to put on the back of your phones or to your kids or grandkids, it has got a brief of what is wrong with glyphosate on the front. There's a very small discussion on the back around the EPA, and I'll talk to that in a moment. It then has a document called Glyphosate No Safe Level. We are updating that because there's been new stuff from the JMPR and EPA that's referred to in the updated two-page in front of it, but it's got tons and tons of research papers linked in there, and you can go online and you can open any of those up, supporting what our concerns are. Then the other one is Paradigm Shift, and I'd like you to look at that on the basis that it's a smaller document, and I know how many papers you get, but it has a bit of a discussion on why you maybe need to have a look at the culture of spraying and how you might be able to minimise costs in other ways rather than using something that's actually toxic to the full community. The scientists that I speak to are concerned about glyphosate in our food, but they think, and this is the work they're working on now, is the biggest level of take by people is through environmental exposure, continuous low-level exposure. I'll flick quickly to the issue of the EPA. The EPA presented to you, and the EPA spun it. I looked at the presentation, and the EPA has just put out another paper or a review around the carcinogenicity. That review used a very narrow band of science. I'd like to see the terms of reference for Wayne Temple that did that review. He's a brilliant toxicologist for acute poisoning. This, what we're talking about, is chronic poisoning. So the criticisms of the EPA review include reduced importance of studies where associations between glyphosate and cancer were identified. So we reduced the importance of those, and excessive reliance on industry-produced science. And you mentioned the JMPR, which they mentioned when they did the presentation to you. The JMPR is that joint WHO and FAO group. That was chaired by an Alan Bubis from the Life Sciences group, ILSI. In 2012, they took $500,000 off Monsanto. They also took a little bit more than that off CropLife, which is like our AgCom, the chemical industry. That is the science that is being used. Those are the managers of some of those decisions that have been put out in the world to confound regulators and decision makers like yourself. But the European Commission, it is seeing through it, it is looking at the full science, the publicly available science, not this industry science that the EPA reviewer chose to point to on a consistent basis. He used science that Monsanto put up. And the EPA's biggest dollop of information they got since the finding that glyphosate was a probable carcinogen was from Monsanto. I did an Official Information Act thing on it. This stuff is toxic, and even if there's elements of doubt, there's so many aspects of it that are toxic, and endocrine disruption is probably the biggest one, the most important one, because it's an issue at parts per billion and even parts per trillion.
Thank you.
What is the safe
We're
limit?
now at 6 minutes.
Thank you. I appreciate the extra time.
So, any questions of Mr. Browning? Councillor Walker?
Sure. I understand that one of the reasons why glyphosate is being pulled in Europe is not only because of impact on food, impact on inhalation and exposure, but also water, and in particular contamination of groundwater and aquifers that are used for people that drink it. Could you make some comment on that, please, Stefan?
I mean, Monsanto in their advertising in the early days was that this was a safe thing. It breaks down as soon as it hits the soil. That's not quite the case. And in fact, some of the breakdown products are even more toxic. It has been found in groundwater. Denmark actually pulled its use in some areas totally for a while until that was rectified. We're just not having that proper study of it in New Zealand, and yet we're increasing the use consistently. It is an issue. It does get into water.
Thank you. Other questions? Councillor Case?
Stefan, you've read the report that's before us today. What do you think this council should be doing? What, if there was one thing we could do that would have an immediate impact, what would it be?
It would be a moratorium on the use of glyphosate straight away.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. At the beginning you said that you wondered why we were doing the review, and I understand it's political, it's just to hold a decision back really. I wasn't at the meeting, but that's what I've got from that, is because I actually believe what you say, that we've actually got a really good policy already, and it's just us enforcing the you know, implementing and making sure it happens with our CCO. So from my point of view, so in your opinion, we don't need to review this, we just need to get on and do what's in it?
Absolutely. My concern was, and I've talked to candidates for the mayoralty and people like that, I don't think they want it to be a local body issue. I think every candidate should be saying yes or no, that they will be getting this off the streets in Auckland. It doesn't need to be reviewed as to a risk. We know it's a risk. So the policy is effective. The objectives and principles, and maybe others will speak to that, are very, very clear that we should be using the lowest toxicity possible.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Browning.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the extra time.
I'll move that we receive the presentation
Second.
on glyphosate and
Thank you.
thank Mr. Browning for his presentation. Those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declare that carried. Thank you. The next presentation is from Hannah Blackmore. Thank you, Hannah. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We have restricted feedback on the scope of this review to 3 vital recommendations for which we seek support and approval from the committee today. The most crucial is that as this review is taking place in response to petitioners' call for an immediate ban on the chemical glyphosate, we require implementation of the precautionary principle and the suspension of all use of glyphosate in public places whilst this review is being undertaken. This request is made in light of the rapidly changing regulation environment and significant rulings and decisions made about glyphosate in the last year, and Stefan has touched on this. IARC's classification that glyphosate is a probable human carcinogen, the subsequent European Union recommendations minimizing its use in public places, the European ban on glyphosate formulations containing a toxic chemical POEA, a common ingredient in glyphosate formulations, the refusal by our government and the EPA to identify which products in use here contain POEA, and our EPA recommendations that children and pets should be kept away from glyphosate spraying. And in support of this, it is noted that the European Parliament actually voted to ban the use of glyphosate in public places. That's the Parliament. Subsequently, even though the European Food Safety Authority, like our EPA, did not agree with IARC's classification, the European Commission did recommend the minimisation of glyphosate in public places when it renewed its licence for only 18 months instead of 15 years. Numerous cities and countries around the world have already put in place restrictions and bans, the latest being a complete ban in Malta, and Italy, where the Minister of Health has just put in place comprehensive restrictions, including banning its use in public areas. And finally, our EPA says POEA is present in 69 of 91 glyphosate formulations used in New Zealand.